Right. Hello, welcome back. So this is going to be um, a just chatting, sort of reading, writing, blog sort of stream, where I sort of talk through um, what I've written down for the second quarter of the year in terms of the games that I've played and finished. That is from June through, no, sorry, April through June. If you're not familiar with the channel, I stream on occasion or unexpectedly, but I have also been writing in a personal gaming blog for about 5+ years, maybe like closer to 6 years at this point. I'll just lower the music a little bit. So it's something I've kind of kept separate from the channel itself or the stream itself, but I've sort of been it's something I've just making sure the audio is okay. It's something I've been trying to incorporate into the Twitch streams as to kind of have all the kind of projects and things I've been working on sort of connect in a sense. And then also for the first time starting this year, I've been uploading any stream that I do manage to stream on here to a YouTube channel, which is also linked on the main channel page if you want to check that out. So there is in addition to this channel, there's a YouTube channel that's basically a stream sort of dump or upload archive channel, where I post like very slightly edited videos of my streams on this Twitch channel. And then there's the blog. So this is like the written form of how I share my impressions while I'm streaming. It's a good way for me to like proofread and correct grammatical and spelling mistakes and all that kind of stuff. And it just kind of helps me improve talking and kind of articulating my thoughts on games, because it's one of my favorite things to do is just to kind of talk about games and why I like them or why I love them, specifically the games I've been playing. So I do quarterly blog posts, and it's really just like impressions and general thoughts, not so much reviews or like opinion pieces, although there's kind of like a blend of it all in some respect. But my goal each quarter, so it's a 3-month period where whatever I'm currently playing, whether it's new releases or old games, if I finish it, I write at least 1 to 2 paragraphs about the game, just general thoughts or just like kind of analyzing it generally. And then at the end of the quarter or at the beginning of the next quarter, I typically will share the blog post. And just starting since last year, I've been doing the streams of the blog post, as I mentioned kind of earlier, or at the start of the stream. So that's kind of my goal, is to kind of just interconnect all 3 things that I've been doing. So YouTube channel, personal blog, and the Twitch streams whenever I get the chance. Which isn't too often because I don't commit to like a standard schedule. But anyway, so here are the games that I've been playing, or that I did play and finish for the second quarter of 2022. I usually start the beginning of the post is sort of like a reflection of the period, so like the reflection of the past 3 months. So I wrote, with each passing year, it's become increasingly difficult to stay on top of every new game release. Between mainstream AAA blockbusters, indies, and all of the in-between, gaming continues to be an embarrassment of riches. While you don't have to and realistically can't play everything, for someone like myself who has a fairly broad range of interests, it's nearly impossible to just pick one game and stick to it. Choice paralysis is definitely a thing, and the second quarter of 2022 continues to have me paralyzed, mostly in a good way. With that said, despite wrapping up another stressful, busy work season that didn't know how to end, while dealing with a pinched nerve in my left elbow since March, has gotten better, I think. Here are the games I managed to roll credits on during the second quarter of 2022. And if you missed what I played or finished during Q1 of 2022, you can read about that here. So there's a link once I post this and share this to the actual WordPress site, and then I'll share it to Twitter, I guess. Here's what I normally do. If you want to read previous posts, it's all on my blog website, so you can at least read the last quarter from this post if you want to. And the title I gave, the kind of introduction, is Cowabunga Dude, which is sort of relevant, or it is relevant to one of the games I did finish this quarter. All right, so let's go to the first game. So this was my 15th completion of 2022, which was Aztech Forgotten Gods. And here's just a picture of the title screen. Aztech Forgotten Gods, developed by Lienzo, is an open-world Meso-American inspired action-adventure game that encapsulates PS2 era open-world games. Think Jak 2. Aztech is an interesting hybrid of sorts and harkens back to the smaller, more condensed open-world games from the PS2 era, but at its core, it's sort of a boss rush game with some exploration elements. It also feels like the natural progression from their previous games, Mulaka, which was also an action-adventure game that took place in semi-open spaces. In Aztech, you play as, I think how you say it is Actly, a delivery runner who lives alone with her mother in a technologically advanced city. Early on in the game, the mom, who's a scientist, finds herself studying ancient artifacts at a nearby dig site when things suddenly go wrong. While helping her mother at the dig site, Actly is suddenly fashioned with a mechanical arm that also happens to be possessed by an ancient god that can speak directly to her. There's some surprising twists and turns along the way, but I found myself enjoying the relationships between Actly, her mother, and their neighborhood friend Tipo the most. The gameplay in Aztech is a mixed bag, unfortunately. Once you get used to how the mechanical arm controls, flying around the environment feels super satisfying. Controlling Actly is how I would have pictured a proper Superman game to feel or play from, say, the early to mid 2000s. The arm itself does control a bit wildly. Punching enemies and performing combos feels mostly satisfying, but you'll find yourself ping-ponging between groups of monsters in a button-smashing, janky sort of way. There's also strange quick-time button presses that pop up on the screen, which auto-locks you onto an enemy, and I never quite understand how these type of attacks became available. This should be... Here, I caught something. I never quite understood how these types of attacks became available. You can even perform one-hit kill execution attacks on enemies when they're weakened and stunned. Fighting regular enemies isn't super compelling. The game is at its best when you're fighting one of the many bosses. These boss encounters are all unique, and they make use of the powers and abilities you unlock for your arm over the course of the game. Their designs are quite interesting, and their skill at times is impressive, especially the final boss fight, which is a truly epic moment. So here's some pictures you can look at if you're reading the actual blog after the fact. I try my best to only upload and include pictures from my playthrough, so I don't try to pull stock images from like Wikipedia or the internet or some other website. So it's usually the pictures I upload onto Twitter from my playthrough. So the open world itself contains very little distractions or side objectives you'd come to find in today's contemporaries, but there are a few things to distract yourself with between the main story missions. There are races and battle arenas scattered around the map that reward you with money and skill points, which can be used to purchase new costumes and skills, respectively. There's just something cozy about how small and down to business the size of the world is, too. You fly around the entirety of the map with relative ease, and while there are beams of light which act as waypoints, the map isn't littered with thousands of icons or collectibles you'd come to expect when playing a modern-day open-world game. That was kind of a mouthful. It's also great to see more games from parts of the world that aren't always represented so authentically in the indie space. So while I was playing this game, I could be wrong. My apologies if I'm getting the country of where the developers are from wrong, but I think they're a Spanish or they're from Mexico. They're a Mexican developer. I'm pretty sure that's the case. But this game reminded me of another game called Raji. Came out a couple years ago, and it's still getting ported around to other platforms. It's on Game Pass, I think. But Raji, an ancient epic, I think it was called, was sort of like Prince of Persia-esque character action game. It was developed in India, and it kind of had a lot of like Indian mythology and culture. It was exclusively developed by like a team from India, so it's cool to see like just again the indie space. You have developers from all over the world kind of making stuff, and they don't get the spotlight all the time. And Aztech, these guys, Lienzo, have been around for a little bit, making, they've made quite a few games so far, or a handful at least. So, Aztech isn't a very long game. I completed the game with the Platinum Trophy, earned it after about 6 hours or so, but I felt compelled to keep playing, despite its boss rush-like structure and somewhat dated gameplay. So, I do have, move the camera. So since I've been streaming this year, I've been uploading all of my playthroughs or my initial impressions of games I decided to stream, and Aztec was one of them. So I'm gonna go to my channel and just I'll play the video or part of the video. It'll load. I don't know if it'll load. Just to kind of like, I always wanted to have gameplay infused with my quarterly blog posts, like as I talked. So let's just skip around. It was really story heavy at the start of the game. All right, so at this point, you don't even have the hand. So I only did like the first hour or so. Do I have the hand at this point? So that's your friend Teppo or Tipo, who's like your neighborhood friend. The dialogue's actually pretty good in Aztec. But as you can see, it's not like the most visually impressive game, but for, again, an indie developer making kind of like a small semi-open world game, like it has a nice art style. The character models are pretty good. So again, this was footage from my playthrough that I uploaded to my channel. Okay, here's me flying around. I at least just wanted to get footage of like flying around because it feels good. That's the best thing about the game is flying around and like the open spaces. So, and this looks like one of the races I wrote about. So they're just classic like fly through the rings like sort of race. Oh no, this was like a pursuit mission. Never mind. But I'm still flying through rings that like boost you through the environment. So it's like classic, really early era open world game stuff. It looks like I failed it there, so. Those were the kind of like side things that they had though. Were just like really old school, like, kind of baby's first open world game objectives or challenges. Like you chased after people or you flew through rings. This camera like won't stay still. And outside of this, like there was the city portion of the game, which was like the hub world, and outside of these kind of challenges that were sprinkled throughout the city, it was just like you would go to these sort of like boss arenas, and there'd be like a little gameplay with like a tiny amount of combat, but the game's really just about these boss fights that are pretty special feeling though. So yeah, that was Aztec. The next game that I completed was the 16th credits roll for 2022. It was Kirby in the Forgotten Land. Kirby in the Forgotten Land, developed by HAL Laboratory, is the latest installment in the long-running franchise. I never thought I'd be doing perfect dodges into counterattacks in a Kirby title, like it's some character action game, but here we are. Kirby has tiptoed around the third dimension on a few outings, whether it was the 2.5D found in Kirby 64, or the top-down 3D perspective of Kirby Blowout Blast on the 3DS. The Pink Puff hasn't fully committed to a proper 3D adventure until now. That said, the game is still very much level-based, and the stages feel more like something out of Super Mario 3D World than, say, Super Mario 64 or even Odyssey. Outside of the game being fully 3D, the biggest draw in Forgotten Land is Kirby's new power called Mouthful Mode. Similar to how Mario uses his cap to absorb the powers of enemies, objects, and things in Odyssey, Kirby can simply inhale special items and take advantage of their properties. Take a traffic cone, for example. When Kirby devours the cone, it grants him the ability to hop along and use the tip of the cone to break cracks in the environment in order to access new areas or solve simple puzzles. I have a lot of run-on sentences, it seems like. There are a ton of unique things to inhale, which transforms Kirby into some truly unique shapes, to say the least. And I completed this game at 100%. The only thing I didn't do, and I'll talk about it below, were like super grindy things. But I loved it. But I'm a big Kirby fan. I've been playing them since I was a kid, and I really haven't missed a mainline title. But I've 100%ed most of them. Kirby has often been criticized for its lack of difficulty over the years. It's true, Kirby tends to be geared towards a younger audience in general, even compared to the likes of Mario, but that doesn't mean it's not without its challenges. Like most Kirby games, The Forgotten Land has some fairly difficult post-endgame content. For one, there's an arena, which is more or less a boss rush mode that you can be found in most Kirby titles. The highest difficulty is truly challenging, but this time Kirby can power up his abilities and even equip himself with passive stat boosts and restorative items that can be purchased from a shop to curb the difficulty. Speaking of shops, there's a hub town of sorts that evolves as you collect, save. As you collect or save Waddle Dees, Kirby's cute little friends that are scattered within the game's many stages. The town has many services, attractions, including minigame locations for fishing and cooking, the aforementioned arena, a theater where you can watch all of the unlocked cinematics and movies, and more. It's quite enjoyable to watch the town grow over the course of the game, as there's almost always something new to look forward to after you complete a world. This is very, like, actually, the way I wrote this was very review-centric. Like, this comes off as, like, a mini review. The way I think I've, like, started this, like, you know, dump of thoughts on this Kirby game. So, like I was saying kind of at the start, I spill into, like, review territory with my blog posts for some games, whereas others, like, I just struggle to find words for. So sometimes just to kind of fill out, not to fill out space, but like I'll write about a game like kind of like as if I'm reviewing it, and then I sort of like spiral into like different things that aren't really like review centric, I guess you could say. If you're a completionist, you can spend a lot of time in Forgotten Land. For one, each of Kirby's copy abilities can be upgraded with a rare material you earn from either completing extra challenge stages or the arena. While you don't have to max out each copy ability to obtain the in-game 100% completion, the ability to do so is there if you want to make Kirby unstoppable in any form. Then there are the collectible figurines you can earn from the gacha machines in town. These figures can be purchased with star coins, the game's standard currency, and if you collect 10 of the same figurine, as you will receive duplicates while striving for a complete set, you earn a tiny golden crown on the figurine's icon. A true completionist nightmare. This is a little more like in the weeds. Completed the game at 100% completion and thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. I think Kirby has a renewed life now being in 3D, so hopefully we see an even better sequel soon. Where's my Kirby? So I posted some like really late game, end game Kirby impressions, where I'm going through the final boss rush with the spacesuit laser power. So that's up on the channel if anyone want to look at it. I do the final true arena challenge during this stream. So it was just end game hard difficulty stuff, but this is when I was fighting it, I think. Or was that my first failure? Yeah, so this was like one of the true forms or whatever. It's tough if you want to do everything in this game. It's not easy. But yeah, like Kirby's like surprisingly, they made him almost like a competent character action game. Like you could do, there's basically bullet time from Bayonetta in this game, which was wild to me. But it's very lenient. Like the um, there's a lot of room for error. I'll just say that there's a margin for error for sure. So, and I think I say I'm kind of scrolling through the figurines list and seeing what I'm missing. So I get 100% on stream while I'm streaming this, which was cool. Kirby will still probably be my top 10 this year, but like honestly, the second half of the year is looking really strong, and some things might get knocked out. I don't know. We'll have to see. All right, game number 17 was Spider-Man. Marvel's Spider-Man. Let's do the full name. Miles Morales. Uh, Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, developed by Insomniac Games, is the follow-up to the extremely popular and successful 2018 release of Marvel Spider-Man. This time around, Peter Parker joins Mary Jane on a trip to cover an urgent international story and essentially hands Miles the keys to the city while he's away. Unlike the first game, Miles Morales is all killer, no filler. Although the map is smaller than the previous game, it's just a tighter experience overall. There's still collectibles, side missions, challenges, and enemy strongholds to overthrow, but it all feels like the greatest hits of Spider-Man 2018 in the best way possible. I felt that Miles himself, his family, his friends, their dynamics and struggles were just so much more interesting than Peter Parker's already well-told past too, which is probably like controversial. I don't know. I'm not a huge Marvel comic book person, so like, I just like Insomniac games, and Spider-Man like is fun to play, so that's where I'm at with it. I don't really have any stakes in anything Marvel related. Miles is just a generally funny, charismatic character, and I hope he takes the lead in the upcoming Spider-Man 2. I played the PS5 version of Miles Morales, so I'm not sure if this feature is exclusive to this version, but being developed to take advantage of PS5's SSD, load times are almost non-existent. Going inside and outside of most interiors, for example, is seamless. The haptic feedback on the DualSense feels great too, and the resistance from pulling down on the triggers when swinging through the city feels mostly more satisfying than it's ever been. Miles Morales just feels good to play. One of the things I also appreciate about Miles Morales, and it's a similar sentiment I share about Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, despite having not played it yet, is the fact that it's a big budget AAA first party release that doesn't overstay its welcome or feel the need to do so. I completed Miles Morales with a good amount of the side content completed, but I'll go for 100% the New Game Plus down the road. I've had my fill of Spider-Man as a whole last year when I replayed and completed the 2018 release and all of its DLC at 100%, so I'm good on Spidey until Spider-Man 2 proper. Yeah, Miles Morales was cool. I like it way more. Obviously, it wouldn't exist without the original 2018 game, so it's a lot of the work this game's doing is because of the game that came before. But in terms of like, if PlayStation Studios can release more kind of bite-sized follow-ups or sequels to like their established franchises, I'm all for it, because it was like maybe 8 to 12 hours to finish. And of course you can go for all the secret stuff and collect everything and do all the challenges and replay it and all that jazz, but it was just like there was no bullshit. Miles Morales is just like the most bullshitless like AAA open world game or whatever you want to call it like I've played in a while. So I kind of want to go back and do everything in it, but it's just I have too much other stuff to play. Ghostwire. All right, the 18th game I finished was Ghostwire Tokyo, developed by Tango Gameworks. It's a first-person action-adventure game that takes place in a post-apocalyptic modern-day Tokyo. You play as Akito, and the game begins with you traveling to the hospital to see your sister when suddenly a fog envelops the city and the citizens of Tokyo are whisked away to the spirit world. Unfortunately, a rogue spirit who's seemingly an ally possesses you, which allows Akito to exist within this now ghostly world full of yokai, spirits, and demons. Ghostwire is quite the departure from Tango's previous games. While their wheelhouse is certainly horror, The Evil Within was a third-person RE4 style chapter-by-chapter survival horror game. Ghostwire, however, is a modern-day open-world game, but with a twist. The entire game is in first person. Instead of guns or melee weapons, you're equipped with elemental magic spells, charms, and an otherworldly bow. The animations in Ghostwire are excellent too, from the hand-weaving spellcasting animations to the Slendermen, umbrella-wielding demons slowly patrolling the streets. Ghostwire is super stylish, and Tokyo is dripping with atmosphere. I really like this game, and it's a shame. I know why a lot of people probably aren't interested in it. Kind of released at a time when there were too many other big games. Like, it was right after Horizon Forbidden West and Elden Ring came out, and some other game came out. I don't remember what it was, but it was a poor release, poor timing, and then everything else about the game was kind of going against it. It reviewed like lukewarm and mild reviews, I think, but I think it's really good. My favorite thing about Ghostwire is the attention to detail, art direction, and enemy design. Tango Gameworks might not make the most visually impressive games, but their craftsmanship shines elsewhere. Although I haven't been to Tokyo, the city in Ghostwire is apparently one of the most authentic recreations of the location to date, even more so than Yakuza's Kamurocho, which is a fictional location based heavily on a real city. Ghostwire is a fairly standard open world game on paper. It's got the Ubisoft towers in quotes, which you'll find in the Assassin's Creed series. For example, only there's shrines here. Once you cleanse a shrine of its demons, more of the map will reveal itself, and the dangerous fog that's surrounding the city will lift. Clearing shrines and unlocking new missions and objectives in other parts of the city propels the story forward. You can complete the story within 10 to 15 hours if you skip all the side activities and collectibles too, which again, it's a short game, so or it's on the shorter side, which is more compelling and appealing to me these days. Tokyo is densely packed with things to do, but like most open world games, once you see the handful of activities the game has to offer, you'll start to see ideas repeat. With that said, the side stories are probably one of the more interesting aspects of Ghostwire, perhaps even more so than the main storyline, which leaves a lot to be desired and quite frankly feels rushed near the end of the game. I completed the game with a handful of the side quests completed, and while I'd like to return to Tokyo and go for 100%, there's just too many other games to play right now. Which is still the case, even at the time of writing this. Alright, I'm just checking my audio, so if you heard like a echo or a repeat of what I just said, I was having streaming issues yesterday with my microphone and all sorts of problems, so I'm just checking everything. Yeah, so I have footage of this game from my playthrough as well. Where was it? All these nighttime streams where I turn the lights out. So you can barely see me. Let me get out to the city. I just think this game deserves some credit or like appreciation because A, it's a Japanese first-person game, which like, you know, how often do we get like first-person games from Japanese studios? It's not very often. And it's such a densely detailed world, and even if the gameplay isn't like super interesting, like there's nothing else that looks like this. There's nothing else that plays like this. And and that's if you remove obviously like the kind of like I was writing or saying, like, yeah, there's a lot of open world tropes in here. You have like your Ubisoft towers and shrines and your mini map with like all the icons littered everywhere. But what you're doing in the game like is not like really anything else. So um the main story I thought was kind of like not super interesting, but there from the side stuff that I did do, that's where the game kind of shines. Like it has a really good localization, or at least the written dialogue or the written text, I guess you could say, is really good. There's a ton of like lore and text file dumps like in your menus that you can read through. And even though the side stuff is repeated like everywhere, like the actual content of it is pretty cool, interesting stuff. So if you like kind of like Japanese like folklore and mythology, with like sort of modern sensibilities, like that also takes place in like modern day Tokyo, quote unquote. Um, and it's not a super long game. You can kind of knock it out in like a couple settings if you really sort of, stay to the main quest line. It's really cool. I really wanted to play more of it, but I finished it and I'm like, all right, I gotta move on. And you can see here in the footage, I'm looking at the map, and there's even like way more icons on the screen once you get further in the game. The Tango Gameworks is seriously at their best with art direction and these enemies. Just like, look how cool that looks when you're basically like stealing the soul out of these demons. And they're all like Slender Men with like umbrellas. There's perfect guards. There was a perfect guard right there. It's got cool like ideas and like cool combat options. There's just not a whole lot to do, and the enemy variety starts to like kind of wear itself thin later, or like towards the end of the game. So, but everything's crunchy and impactful. Like when you cast a spell, like you can feel it when it hits an enemy. Like, and that's what I think Tango does really well. On top of their like ridiculous art direction. Yeah, just a cool, interesting game that we'll probably never see a sequel, and we'll probably never see a game like this ever again. So for that reason, it might still make my top 10 this year. I don't know. I really want to go back and play more of it. I don't have the time, or I don't want to make the time for it right now. Is what I should say. Our game number 19. This is a sort of a surprise. Panic Museum, known as Haunted Museum in Japan, developed by Taito and GameWax, is a light gun game that is exclusive to the arcades. Arcades in the West seem far and few between these days, although I'm no arcade aficionado. For my few experiences visiting arcades since being an adult, they seem regulated to beach boardwalks or Dave and Buster's, if you're familiar. I grew up visiting local arcades in various malls in southeastern Pennsylvania, not far from Philadelphia. Our go-to arcade was called Pocket Change in the Granite Run Mall. As a kid, my brother and I would spend hours in there while my family shopped elsewhere. We would reconvene at Annie Ann's Pretzels afterwards. Arcades in the 90s had everything: fighting games, light gun games, beat 'em ups, pinball machines, and more. Today, for my limited experience re-entering the arcade scene between the East and the West Coast, I've done a bit of traveling lately. Feels more homogenized than it's ever been. Between the arcade boardwalk at Rehoboth Beach in Delaware to the casino arcade in Santa Cruz, California, I saw the same. I'm gonna put California in here. I didn't write that. I saw the same Raw Thrills cabinets, the Halo Fire Team Raven machines, Deal or No Deal, and many other similar games. If you're familiar with this genre, Panic Museum is in the same vein as the House of the Dead or Time Crisis. Like most light gun games, Panic Museum has you playing through a series of linear stages with multiple paths, hidden items, and boss fights. In Panic Museum, you explore multiple branches of a museum, which includes gift shops, a library, and other historical exhibits. The story is silly, but it doesn't matter. The VO is campy and bad too, which only adds to the charm. Panic Museums seem relatively fair by arcade standards. Your characters have fairly large health bars, and powerful weapon pickups and medkits are plentiful within the stages, though some are very hard to shoot at the screen as the screen whips around quickly. The enemy variety is great, and the boss fights are all unique despite how you approach defeating them. The weak points on bosses only become visible for short periods of time, and like most arcade-like gun games, it's impossible not to take a hit. I was really enjoying my time with Panic Museum until we got to the final mission. So my partner and I were playing this cooperatively next to each other at the arcade in Santa Cruz. It was really cool. But we got to the last boss, and it's complete nonsense. And it cements the idea that arcade games just want your money. We spent somewhere between $10 to $20. It costs $1 per credit. We got the bad ending, which really bummed me out. If there was a home console port of Panic Museum like the ones we used to see during the PS2 era, I would have played the shit out of this game. So yeah, I took some pictures while I was at the arcade in Santa Cruz. There's the storefront. Or the arcade front on the boardwalk. I've heard about this before I saw this, but as soon as I saw it, I'm like, I'm not leaving this arcade until I finish it, or until we finish it. So, but I was so bummed out. The game's mostly fair considering it's $1 per like credit. And by arcade standards, like I said, it's not like too difficult. But the final boss, you get a countdown when you're at the boss. It's a short countdown, and if both of the players, or if you're not focusing on like the enemy core, like the weak point for the boss, and there's like a million other enemies on screen like blocking the weak spot for the final boss. If the countdown reaches 0, you cannot use any more credit or any more money. You get a bad ending, the credits roll, and you have to start from the beginning again. So I was like, I had no idea, and I'm like, that's bullshit. I just wanted. We spent like nearly $20, and like all I wanted to see was like the true ending. I didn't even know there were multiple endings. That was funny. All right, game number 20 of 2022 that I finished was Umurangi Generation. I had trouble writing about this one. Developed by Origami Digital, is a first-person photography game where you take photos of people, places, and things. It's a game I've been wanting to play since it was first released, and having just been added to Game Pass this year, I decided to give it a whirl. Umurangi has a lot to say without actually saying anything, as it's all done through environmental storytelling. From what I could gather, you're following along a group of teenagers or young adults as they travel from location to location in a city that's both repressed by police and on high alert from what seems like an alien. Well, I should rewrite that. From what seems alright to be an alien invasion. Umurangi paints a dystopian picture set to a jet grind radio aesthetic and a killer soundtrack. It's both depressing and cool at the same time. Each stage has you completing a list of objectives and collecting film canisters. All of the main objectives must be completed before you move on to the next stage, which can range from taking pictures of police holding guns, a particular word spray painted on a wall, or all of your friends hanging out in a single shot. The picture-taking aspect of Umurangi is both lenient and strict depending on the objective and stage, however, sometimes you can put on a wide-angle lens and just auto-fire your camera into the crowd and complete 3 objectives at once. Other times you have to put on a zoom lens and get real close to the object, word, or thing you're supposed to capture. The film canisters that are scattered around the stages both refill your camera and count towards bonus objectives. When you complete all of the objectives in a single stage, you're rewarded new filters or camera lenses, some of which make completing a lot of the objectives more easily once unlocked, which was pretty cool. The film canisters are extremely well hidden too. Good luck finding all of them without a guide. It almost becomes a pixel hunting game as they often blend into the background. I completed the game with all of the achievements unlocked, including the DLC that was included in the special edition. I was able to do everything on my own, outside of finding a few extremely well hidden film canisters. There are also a ton of additional time trial modes and photo mode. I think it should just be a photo mode that removes all of the objectives in the time limit so that you can take pictures at your leisure. I was content after finishing the main story mode and unlocking all of the extra camera lenses and filters. However, not necessarily a game I would come back to for its photo mode, but I enjoyed my time spent with Umurangi nonetheless. Here we go. somewhere in here. That's the next game we'll get to. Truck to Yomi. So yeah, it's a pretty lenient like picture capturing game, or like photo taking game, but it the thing I became obsessed with was collecting all the film canisters, and they're so well hidden, and I had to use a guide for like a few of them. Where you'll just be like spending so much extra time scrounging the floor, like kneeling down, like just smashing X, waiting for that like pickup or collect prompt to come up. And it's really it becomes exhausting if you're trying to find it all without having some sort of help or guide or whatever. But yeah, like it's not necessarily a game I would, like I said, like I would come back to. There's so many extra time trial modes and like a free picture taking like leisure mode. I'm not like a big camera film type of person, so like maybe it's more appealing to people who like actually like photography. Um, but there's a lot of filters, a lot of different modes. It's a really cool, uh, a really interesting game, and there is like definitely references to other things. Like there's straight up like a reference or homage to Neon Genesis Evangelion in here, so it's a cool game. I know what game's next. I'm just gonna jump to it. Game number 21 of 2022 was Trek to Yomi, developed by Flying Wild Hog and Leonard Menciari, is a black and white action adventure game that tells a classic samurai revenge story with heavy influences from Japanese mythology and Akira Kurosawa films. I haven't felt as conflicted by a game this year than I have been with Trek to Yomi. On the surface, it has nearly everything that I love about video games. The combat is simple and arcade-like. There are counterattacks, a parry mechanic, unique bosses, and hidden collectibles everywhere. Trek to Yomi also incorporates fixed camera angle. Should be fixed camera angles, which I have an affinity for, and at times it feels like you're playing a PS2 era Capcom survival horror game like Onimusha. While the story and characters weren't very interesting, it was the environments, camera shots, and set pieces that propelled me forward. The combat has a degree of depth, the enemy variety wanes quickly, and stages become a bit too long with little variety. Checkpoints start to become too far apart and as well. And by the end of the game, it feels more like an enemy gauntlet than the first half of the game, which felt better paced with some exploration elements and simple puzzles. I completed the game on hard difficulty and it was extremely challenging, particularly the boss battles, but it was more frustrating than rewarding. There's also no chapter select or new game plus options, and nearly every upgrade or collectible gets cut off or locked out once you make too much progress within a chapter, which drove me nuts. While Trek to Yomi isn't a terribly long game, completing it at 100% doesn't respect your time at all. I'll never understand why some developers choose not to include chapter selects or other features which would make replaying their games more enticing. My only guess is that these types of extras weren't included due to time or budgetary reasons, although the game does have a degree of production value, so who knows. I wanted to like Trek to Yomi more than I did, but time will tell if I decide to come back to it for another track. I was trying to be funny. Yeah, I played through this on hard difficulty, and it was a mistake, I think. Uh, Part of me enjoyed the challenge at times because fighting these, like this boss fight, for example, like once you defeat them, it's pretty rewarding feeling or satisfying. But like they have some bullshit hit detection or like patterns that are just really frustrating, and you take too much damage and they do too much damage, or you do too little damage and you take too much is what I meant to say. And the checkpoints were mostly good until like the later half of the game, where I just thought like you'd do sections and they would just they'd put you so far back, and it was so frustrating redoing sections. And the combat starts to they like tried to introduce, enemy types where you had to break through their guard or roll behind them, or like enemies that had bows or guns like from a range. Like they did their best to introduce like new ideas like over the course of the game, but it's it's a little too long. It's not the gameplay is like just interesting enough, but not like not interesting enough to kind of um make up for like kind of how the game just keeps like trudging along, I guess. Um and the story and the characters are so forgettable. Like just the story's not bad. It's just like it's very like classic. It seems like they're not really telling a tale that you haven't really heard before, from my understanding. But like it's not fair to compare it to Ghost of Tsushima, but the characters and the story in that game are far more compelling, even though they're two different types of games. That just the main I couldn't even tell you the name of the main character off the top of my head. I finished this a couple months ago. Um, my biggest pet peeve, like I said, there's so many collectibles and upgrades, and there's no way to replay chapters. So if you missed one thing, the game auto saves. There's one save slot. You have to replay the whole game again if you want to collect everything. So you either got to like know everything about the game or have a guide open at all times. And I'm just like, just fuck that. Like I'm good. It was cool. I really wanted to like it more because the camera angles. I love I love pre-rendered backgrounds. Not that they were utilizing them. I think it was more like 3D. Everything was rendered in 3D, like 3D environments, but the cameras were all fixed at certain points of the screen. So like it felt like an old school survival horror game. So it had everything in the making for me to love it. But it just was like it just did too many other important things kind of wrong. So it just threw my whole mood on the game out the window. Game number 22 of 20 Game number 22 of 2022 is Grapple Dog. Developed by Medallion Games, is a cute 2D platformer where you play as a dog with a satisfying grappling hook. The story takes Pablo, the cute pup, and his friends on a journey across the sea to find 4 magical objects created by a legendary inventor before they fall into the wrong hands. When I downloaded Grapple Dog, it was the type of game I could play. I could only play in short sessions, about a stage or two per sitting. This is partly due to how I typically approach platformers, as I usually like to collect everything in a stage before I move on to the next one. The levels are quite where was that? Yeah, levels are quite lengthy here too. Most stages have you platforming and grappling from point A to B while avoiding enemies and hazards along the way, but sometimes the stages can be quite maze-like with some minor puzzles. Mostly boils down to hitting switches and backtracking through open gates. There are a ton of things to collect in each stage as well, one of which is required to progress. There are a ton of hidden levels that are quite challenging too. I actually had a lot of trouble writing about this game. Grapple Dog is a much longer game than you expect it to be, and while each stage introduces new ideas and mechanics along the way, the whole experience started to wane as I approached the final world. There's nothing necessarily wrong with Grapple Dog, and while I felt compelled to keep playing it until I saw the credits roll, I found myself struggling to convey my thoughts on the game after I finished it. My time spent with Grapple Dog felt like it was sort of in one ear and out the other, unfortunately. It's a colorful, upbeat platformer that doesn't stray too far from the 2D platformer formula. I completed the game with nearly everything collected, but there's a post-game world and time trials left to complete. Part of me wanted to go for 100%, but again, my plate is full. And there are just other games I need to finish first. So, yeah, I struggled to write anything like not generic about this game. Like I'm just like I played through it, and there were things to collect, and the grappling hook felt good for the most part. Like the level, like I have a pet peeve with levels being too long for platformers. So like when stages overstay their welcome, or when developers, especially like 2D or in the indie scene space, make levels that just keep going and going and going, and there's nothing like new or interesting like within those levels. Like I'm just like, please cut this up. Like put these, take like one solid idea, put it in a level where like you introduce the idea, you play around with it, and then you just finish it. Call it quits. And these levels were a little too long, but not. They were just. They were almost right at the point where they would have been too long. But it's generally a fun kind of breezy game to play through. There's just nothing really to say about it other than like the grapple hook feels good and it's cute. He plays a little doggy, like a little puppy. That's it. Like there's a cool overworld where you sail around on like the ocean, but then you just kind of like the stages are sort of like in a dot to dot world map, like a top down world map. So it's a cool little um, presentation, I guess you could say, for the world map. And you can go inside your boat, the one that's pictured like on the title screen here. You really can't do a lot in it. You can kind of talk to the two characters that, that you're traveling with. And there's a mini game, I think, in there as well. But it's not like a super interesting hub world. Or base, I guess you could say. Ooh. I really like this game. Game number 23, 2022 was Disc Room, developed by Terry, Dose, Kitty, and JW. It's a top-down 2D top-down arcade-like game where you go room by room trying to avoid saw blades. It's almost like somebody made a game based on the 1997 sci-fi horror film Cube. There's barely an intro cinematic that sets up the story, and then you're off to a countless amount of deaths. Despite its brutal difficulty, Disc Room is one of the most addicting games I've ever played. The game is structured in a grid-like fashion, each room containing different saw blade types and hazards. To make progress, the player must complete certain challenges in each room, which will unlock adjacent rooms and new sections on the grid. Some of the challenges ask the player to simply die by each of the saw blade types scattered about the rooms. Other challenges may ask the player to survive for a period of time before perishing. What makes Disc Room so difficult to put down is just how instant the reloads are when you die. There's just a rewarding sense of progression on display here, as you're almost always looking at the map, slowly filling in the rooms, wondering what new saw blade type will kill you next. I'll just say what new saw blade will kill you next. Disc Room is short but packed with content, and getting 100% is simply masochistic. There's also an extremely challenging hard mode that's unlocked once you finish the game. I completed the game at 93% completion before I tapped out. A big part of me wanted to keep playing until I reached 100% completion, but it's the perfect pick up and play game whenever I feel like dying over and over again. So this was a game also that was just like, there's not a whole lot to say. Like, it's top down, you're this little person, like, you just survive in rooms that have different types of saw blades that kind of chase after you or bounce around the, you know, the square box of a room. And the game tracks like a ton of different things and kind of like with a completionist sort of mentality. Like there's just, you know, there's a saw blade catalog, so you want to kind of seek out all the saw blades. And then there's like secret rooms that are like, you know, that you have to unlock in kind of certain special ways. And there's like boss type rooms that have like boss blades, I guess you could say. It's really cool. And you can finish it in a sitting, honestly. Like it's just a super addicting game that kind of like taps into the completion aspect like really strongly, but also is the gameplay's just like super simple. It's addicting. As soon as you die, you restart like in a second. I really liked it. All right, game number 20. What is this? 24 of 2022 is Panzer Dragoon Remake. Panzer Dragoon Remake, developed by Forever Entertainment SA and Megapixel Studio, is a decent remake of the Sega Saturn cult classic rail shooter. Panzer Dragoon is a series that many hardcore fans have wanted to come back for quite some time, but maybe not exactly like this. While this remake appears to be a relatively faithful update to the original release, there's something off about it that I can't quite put my finger on. The soundtrack by Saori Kobayashi is still incredible, however, so you'll at least your ears will have an enjoyable experience at the very least. The game also seems a lot easier, but that could be due to the HD visuals and perhaps some damage value tinkering. Although I think it's just a lot easier to see or spot enemies now that it was on a grainy CRTV. Oh, I gotta rewrite that. That's like a mouthful. This game also seems a lot easier, but that could be due to the HD visuals and perhaps some damage value tinkering. I'm gonna put a period there and then just say, I think it's just a lot easier to see or spot enemies now than it was on a grainy TV, CRTV, let's say, 2 decades ago. I think it's just a lot easier to see or spot enemies. Well, that sounds weird. In this version than it was on a grainy CRTV 2 decades ago, which still has its charm, of course. I think that sounds like a little bit better. I'm not thrilled with how that sounds, though. Speaking of replaying this version of the game in particular, there's a ridiculous trophy for logging 100 in-game hours. While you can certainly replay the game for a better hit ratio or higher score, or give hard difficulty a try, 100 in-game hours is a lot to ask of anyone, even for the most dedicated fan. I finished a run on normal difficulty. While the game isn't very long, you can finish a playthrough in about an hour. It's meant to be replayed for better hit ratios and higher scores. There's also a hidden menu called Pandora's Box, which is an unlock found in some of the other games in the series, and it contains some neat extras like a god mode, but there's nothing else too exciting here. I enjoyed my one playthrough down memory lane, but I didn't feel compelled to replay it anytime soon. If we can only get a port or remake of Panzer Dragoon Saga now, or even I'll take Panzer Dragoon 2 Zwei or Zui, the sequel. I don't know if they have plans to remake that game, but my channel is sort of like partially dedicated. The name of the channel is dedicated, and the meaning behind the channel is kind of dedicated to something from Panzer Dragoon Saga 2. So I would like to replay. I still own somehow the Sega Saturn version, but I have some gameplay of this as well, I think. It was an okay remake. Like, all things considered, it wasn't like the worst thing ever. It was very faithful, sort of like a one-to-one remake, but and I'll stress this as well. Like, I played through on normal, and I played the Saturn version not too many years ago, like kind of recent-ish. And you take so much less damage in this PS4 version. I have no idea why. But that's definitely the case. Yeah, honestly, I don't even know what I would want from a new Panzer Dragoon, so like I think it's cool that the remake's a little easier and more convenient for people to like kind of re-experience the classic, but like obviously the Sega Saturn original, like the look of it, the feel of it on original hardware, it's a lot more impressive. Today, like rail shooters, like I don't not many indie devs are even making games like Panzer Dragoon, so I like this series because I kind of grew up with it, and it's like a weird, interesting series of games that feel very alien and kind of special for what they were at the time. And their soundtrack's incredible. The art direction, again, is incredible. The dragons look so cool. There's not a whole lot like Panzer Dragoon, so there's definitely like a there's reason for it to come back, but also it's kind of hard for it to come back, I guess. Tunic. Tunic was my 25th completion of the year, and I put quotes around completion because some people would argue I didn't really finish it, but I'll talk about that in a second. Tunic, developed by Andrew Scholdice. and Company is a top-down Zelda-like with some cryptic puzzles akin to the type of stuff you'd find in Fez or The Witness. It's almost best if I say less about the game, as it's a type of experience that's better if you go into it mostly blind. While Tunic clearly takes inspiration from a lot of classic and contemporary games, it still manages to carve its own distinct look and feel. The soundtrack by Janice Kwan and Lifeformed is also excellent, and the sound design, particularly when you're activating some sort of mechanism, shrine, or the like, is bassy and crunchy. One of the more unique aspects of Tunic is how the game teaches you how to play it. In Tunic, instead of forced tutorial windows popping up to explain things, the game gradually unfolds its mechanics and design language through an in-game manual or booklet that must be collected and pieced together page by page. These pages are in a fictional language, so nothing is deliberately explained. Instead, the player must use the images and iconography to decipher each page's purpose and meaning. I can't believe I didn't upload like a picture of the manual either, which is really weird. It's such a big deal in the game. Unless you have the best intuition or a lot of luck, you have to pore over these pages in order to make progress. Fortunately, the manual is beautifully illustrated and fun to look at. If there was a physical collector's edition release of Tunic, I'd love to see the in-game manual printed physically in all of its glory. And I say like, hello, limited run games. Some minor spoilers, Tunic has a language, quotes, of sorts that needs to be deciphered in order to access the true ending. If I were 10 years younger and I didn't have like 100 other games I wanted to play, I would have enjoyed busting out the notepad and banging my head against the wall. I managed to roll the credits on the initial ending without having to resort to a guide, which felt really good, by the way. But there's still plenty of secrets and manual pages and other cryptic puzzles to discover when or if I decide to come back. I'm good for now, though. Yeah, Tunic was like... I think I did record myself playing a little bit of this. Really early game Tunic upload. There, yes. So of course I'm in this like dark cave or something. Let's get out to the world map. I started this game months ago and I'm like, all right, this is cool, but I was sort of like just playing Elden Ring at the time, so I was trying to like starting something like this and with Elden Ring wasn't a good idea probably. And it's a lot harder than you would think it is. And I played through it without putting on like the support mode where they like turn off the combat or whatever. 'Cause I wanted to experience it like just how it was sort of, I guess, intentionally designed, but it's a game that wouldn't probably impress you from like out of the gate, but it's a slow burn that, like, you know, excuse the cliche, but like each page that you turn, or the pun or whatever you want to call it, like with each new page that you kind of like turn in this manual, and here's a manual page right here actually for me picking it up. There's so much important information on these manual pages, and they're like beautifully illustrated, and they have like all these little hints and secrets and kind of like nudges to kind of make you make progress, I guess you could say. Like there's everything you need to know about the game are on these manual pages that you collect, and it's just a really cool way to kind of teach the player like what the game's about, how to play it, and like where you're supposed to go. But not my problem with it, but towards the end, once you kind of get the initial ending, there's like a secret post game sort of that becomes a little too like notepad heavy from my understanding. And honestly, it seems like the type of thing I would have to set a lot of time off to the side to kind of figure it out on my own, and I don't know if it's something I want to spend like, you know, another 10 to 15 hours trying to be like how do I just do this next thing? And I don't want to look at a guide at the same time or watch like a YouTube video, so I just was like, whatever. I saw credits technically, and I finished it. And so many people told me like, oh, you got to go back and do the true ending, and I'm like, maybe if I can find time, which is at this point isn't going to happen. By the end of the year, I'll come back to it, but I don't know. Really cool game, and it's better if I just say less about it because it's one of those games you should go in blind and just kind of like appreciate for what it's trying to do like as you're playing it. So if you like Zelda games at all, top down 2D action adventure games, like you have no excuse to play it. It's on Game Pass still, I think. All right, we're getting towards the end. Game number 26 of 2022 was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. Developed by Tribute Games as a solid follow-up to the arcade console TMNT beat-em-ups from my childhood. Feels like the natural step or progression from Turtles in Time, the Hyperstone heist, but with some modern sensibilities. Shredder's Revenge probably has the most robust and complicated moveset in the entire franchise, but it's easy to pick up and play like most classic beat-em-ups. The more advanced tech might not be as interesting as the types of combos or juggles or wall bouncing techniques you'd find in, say, Streets of Rage 4, but there's a nice middle ground here that's approachable for all types of players. With that said, I wish the collectibles were more meaningful or served some greater purpose than Shredder's Revenge. You collect a variety of items which aren't very difficult to find. VHS tapes for Vernon, newspapers for Burn, and secret diaries for Irma, for example. The only purpose they serve, however, is that they're tied to achievements or trophies, but it could have been cool if, say, the diary entries and newspaper articles were readable. For example, the collectibles and extras could have provided some additional TMNT lore, which I think fans would have appreciated, so it feels like a missed opportunity. I was really bummed out about that with this game. Like, I'm actually not as hot on this game as I think a lot of people are, and I feel bad that I'm not, like, super jazzed about some things. I'm a little disappointed with some stuff. As fun as the game is to play, I wish the level design was a bit more interesting across the board. Similar to some of the previous TMNT games, there are skateboard stages scattered among the traditional beat-em-up levels. Unfortunately, outside of some stage hazards, these levels feel extremely similar to the traditional on-foot brawler stages, and beyond that, there isn't a whole lot of variety. Needless to say, the soundtrack by T-Lopes is incredible. Completed the game's story mode on gnarly difficulty, and while it was challenging at times, it was fair due to the combat options at your disposal and the character upgrades you earn over the course of the game. I have yet to try the game's arcade mode, but I presume that's where the real challenge is I don't believe your characters can level up, and you have a limited amount of lives and continues. I've also yet to party up with up to 6 other players or try the online multiplayer modes, but I'm guessing the game's more fun locally with friends and family. I'll definitely be back for another slice or two down the road. Yeah, I was really, I was a little... I don't think there's anything really bad about this game, but, like, a little disappointed with, like, some of the extras and the features in it. And the level design, the bosses are probably the most unique or interesting thing about each level. While the background art's nice, like, the levels are pretty straightforward, and for a beat 'em up, they don't really have to be anything more than what they are in this game, but I was hoping for, like, a little bit more variety. And, like, again, like, the kind of surfboard, skateboard levels, they just felt really like you were running through the level, like, at a higher speed than actual, like, hover bike or hoverboard levels. I don't know. I feel like they could have done something to add, like, a little bit more variety to the gameplay, even though, like, the core combat is probably the most interesting out of any Turtles brawler out there. So I'm kind of mixed on the whole experience. And I think the collectibles are, like, super disappointing. Like, they literally just add points, and they're, like, cameo, like, guest characters from, like, I guess the comics and the TV shows. But they just give you points for level ups, like, for character upgrades, which are really basic. Like, I don't know why you couldn't watch the like, there was some footage maybe they could have recorded for, like, the VHS tapes that you collect. Or, like, the diary, like, what's so hard about writing up a little diary entry? Like, I don't know. Just some kind of missed opportunities, I thought. But maybe again it was just like a budget time constraint thing, or just wasn't in their vision for the game. The things that were most important about making a new beat 'em up for Turtles are there. I just think like once I was like, all right, they got it. Like this feels good. I'm like, but where's like this other stuff could be a little bit better. I don't know. We're at our last game for this quarter. Game number 27, 2022 was Kao the Kangaroo. Developed by Tate Multimedia, is a reboot of sorts to a 3D mascot platformer that started back in 2000 on the Dreamcast. It's comfort junk food platforming that clearly wears its inspiration on its sleeve. The story isn't very important here, but Kao is in search of his missing father and sister. Along the way, he comes across a pair of cursed gloves which speak to him for whatever reason. It must be said that I'm no way trying to disparage the actors or actresses who provided voices to these characters, but the English voice acting VO is terrible, particularly Kao himself. There's a surprising amount of dialogue and cinematics where characters are speaking, and none of it is interesting or endearing, unfortunately. With that said, the game itself is colorful, the characters animate fairly well, and the environments look gorgeous from afar. Kao feels good to control too, which is the most important aspect when it comes to making a fun 3D platformer. Kao the Kangaroo is a competent 3D platformer, although it may not need one, it sort of lacks its own identity. You could arguably replace Kao with any other anthropomorphic character, give it a new title, and the game would likely work as it is without changing anything else, which is a little harsh for me to say, but it's how I feel, kind of. I wish the developers leaned more into the fact that Kao is a boxing kangaroo. The possessed boxing glove narrative is weird, and it doesn't really go anywhere interesting. The gameplay itself, outside of beating up baddies with your gloves, doesn't play into the fact that Kao is a boxer. I don't know. You do gain elemental powers over the course of the game, but they don't make the combat any more engaging, and they act more like keys for solving extremely simple environmental puzzles. At the end of the day, Kao is clearly meant for kids or the young at heart, and I enjoyed it for what it was worth. I completed the game at 100% with the platinum trophy earned. And I do have some footage of Kao. Oh. Do I have him speaking? Yeah, here's a whole cutscene. Me mute. I don't know if this is gonna come across loud enough. Yeah, I don't know why I can't hear the playback. I'm assuming this is like the last hub world. I can't imagine this game being super long. Maybe I have to make the desktop audio louder. What a weird crew. Weird crew of characters. I just want to show off his voice. It's so like, what are we doing here?
Doing here? Don't even try to stop me. I'm going to see Jayabaya now.
No, I won't stop you. On the contrary, if you want to
I don't know
see
if it's
him
gonna
so
come
badly,
across.
I'll take you right to him. Come on. So, you're now the hero
So
you want
bad.
to be, right? Hashtag save the jungle is trending now. Maybe I should think about selling your merch instead of Jayabaya's now.
No, thanks, but no.
Anyway. Oh, the volume was probably really loud. It's weird that the desktop audio is not playing now. I'll have to look into that later. No, now it is a little bit. I guess it can't go too low on the audio mixer. Anyway, KO was I love 3D platformers, so like I played the original and the PS2 sequel back in the day. So like when they announced that this game was coming out, I'm like, there's no way on this earth, godforsaken earth, that like KO is coming back when like, you know, games like Ape Escape or Banjo-Kazooie haven't had proper sequels or reboots. But whatever, more, you know, more power to the developers. I think it's the original developer too, or at least it's the same company or team that worked on the older games. That I don't know, but like it visually kind of has like a Crash 4 aesthetic or look. And they kind of, I mean, there's literally crates that you smash in this game, so like it's not as like kind of on track or like on rails as Crash Bandicoot typically is. Even though there's literally a level where like something is behind you chasing you and you're running towards the screen, so that's like as Crash Bandicoot as you get. But like my point is that like KO like could have been any other creature or any other animal, and you really could have called it anything else and it would have been the same game just as it is now. Like, but at the same time, what do you do with a boxing kangaroo? Like, it's not going to be a fighting game. Like, I don't know what I don't know what I want from KO. I don't know what to say about it, and I'm overthinking it because it's supposed to, whatever, it's like a kid's game. But as an adult, just looking back on it, I'm like, does KO need to be here? I don't know. What is he offering? But I played it enough, I 100%ed it because I'm crazy, I guess. So yeah, let's do a summary. That's everything that I finished for the second quarter of the year. So again, that was from April through June. I actually finished a good amount. Some shorter games, some like medium-sized games. So I finished Kao the Kangaroo, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, Tunic, which was the bad ending, or like the first ending, Panzer Dragoon Remake, Disc Room, Grapple Dog, Trek to Yomi, Umurangi Generation, Panic Museum, Ghostwire Tokyo, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and Aztech Forgotten Gods. So yeah, again, that was everything that I've been playing for the second quarter of the year. I will upload this to my YouTube channel, which you can also find on the main About section, main Twitch channel page, along with a link to my personal gaming blog, which I will post this probably shortly after the stream. So it'll be available on WordPress in written form, and then as a Twitch VOD for the VOD for the Twitch channel, and then an archived, slightly edited video upload of this stream after the fact at some point down the road. So yeah, that's everything I've been playing for the second quarter of the year. I'm currently at, I think as of today, I am up to 29 completions of the year. Again, my goal was to at least finish 52 games in a single year. I don't know if I'll hit it this year. I'll be traveling again and be away. I'm going to be away from most of my games and my streaming equipment for another month and a half or so. So I will be back until sometime mid to late September to do any sort of streams, let alone like a what I've been playing Q3, which will be at the end of September or early October. So we'll see what games I manage to complete by then. But so far, I only have 2 that I've beaten. I'm working on some longer games, Elden Ring, Ys 9. So I might not have as many games to talk about, but I'll have maybe a little bit more to talk about for like each game that I play. So yeah, if you're watching this after the fact, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, I would appreciate it. Or even give me a follow on this Twitch channel. But no worries if not. We'll be back and see everyone all again soon, hopefully. So, all right, take care. Bye.